By the summer of 42 BC, the 19 legions and 13,000 cavalry belonging to the triumvirs Marcus Antonius and Caesar Divi-Filius, and the 20 legions and 25,000 cavalry belonging to the liberators Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, all descended upon Greece as the triumvirs and the liberators prepared to battle one another in their quest for control of Rome. Before transporting the lion's share of his forces from Brundisium to Greece, Marcus Antonius had advanced 8 legions into Thrace under the commands of Lucius Decidius Saxa and Gaius Norbanus Flaccus on a reconnaissance mission to locate the armies of Brutus and Cassius. Having transferred the brunt of their legions from Asia Minor, the forces of Brutus and Cassius now landed on the shores of Thrace. Fearing that those among their men who had once fought under Julius Caesar might defect to the cause of the triumvirs, the liberators sought to turn their troops into soldiers of fortune by advancing them their pay. To each legionary they gave 1,500 denarii, and to each centurion 7,500 denarii from the spoils of wars fought across the Balkans and the cities of Asia Minor. And to arouse in them a belief in the cause, Cassius defended the assassination of Julius Caesar in an impassioned speech to the troops, stating, "From the time when Caesar's domination began, you no longer elected any magistrate, either praetor or consul, or plebeian tribune. Most lamentable of all, you could not defend your tribunes against insult, whom you had constituted your own peculiar and perpetual magistracy, and had made sacred and inviolable. Yet you saw these inviolable men despoiled, without trial, at the order of one man." As he continued, Cassius pointed out the hypocrisy of the triumvirs in claiming, "They are avenging Caesar," when they proscribed men who were not even in Rome when Caesar was killed. At the height of his fiery persuasion, Cassius reminded the legions, "Let it give no one any concern that he has been one of Caesar's soldiers. We were not his soldiers then, but our country's. The pay and the rewards given were not Caesar's, but the Republic's. For the same reason, you are not now the soldiers of Cassius or of Brutus, but of Rome." Now pumped full of mammon and a manifesto, the liberators' legions bypassed the Caesarian legates, Decidius Saxa and Norbanus Flaccus, whose 8 legions were guarding the pass, by traversing uncharted mountain paths that allowed them to exit the mountains near the town of Philippi. In September of 42 BC, Brutus and Cassius claimed the high ground with abundant natural defences. On adjacent hills which overlooked open plains, they set up side-by-side camps, which they connected by building a single wall. To their north was forestland, and to their south was thick marshland which extended to the coastline. Behind them stood mountains, and the path which connected the coastal town of Neapolis to that of Philippi, ensuring that the liberators had access to incoming supplies over land and sea. Merging with the forces of Norbanus and Saxa, Marcus Antonius arrived first and set up his camp on the plains approaching Philippi. With no natural defences to help protect his position, Antonius ordered the building of fortifications, embankments, and palisades. Caesar Divi-Filius, who had fallen ill during his naval passage to Greece, had been left behind to recover in the town of Epidamnus, as Antonius marched off with full command of their combined legions. Several days after Antonius arrived, Caesar was carried into camp on a litter, at which time he took control of his half of the army, likely putting them under the command of his legate and close friend Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Now prepared to engage the liberators, Marcus Antonius tried several times over the next weeks to initiate battle, hoping to draw Brutus and Cassius from the high ground, but the liberators would not take the bait. Why should they? They had Greece under a naval blockade, which prevented Antonius and Caesar from receiving fresh supplies. And so, with their own well-fortified position and their own supply lines intact, Brutus and Cassius planned to starve the Caesarian legions into submission. But Marcus Antonius had a different plan. In an attempt to cut off the liberators' supply lines and force them off their hill and into a battle, Antonius discreetly sent legions into the marshlands to build a causeway, thinking to sneak his forces behind the camp of Cassius. Eventually, Cassius discovered Antonius's men in the marshes and ordered his own men to begin extending their fortifications in a race to prevent Antonius from cutting off the liberators' supply lines. On October 3rd, which was Gaius Cassius Longinus's birthday, Antonius noted the amount of men Cassius had committed to the extension of his own fortifications. Seeing that his defensive line was now left thin, Antonius launched an attack at the point where Cassius's new fortifications attached to the old, and soon Antonius's men came pouring through the breach to storm Cassius's camp. On the adjacent hill, the liberator forces charged the camp of Caesar Divi Filius without orders from Marcus Junius Brutus. Because Brutus had spread his defensive line so thin, and the Caesarians had not positioned their own lines to match, Brutus's men flanked the army of Caesar under the command of Agrippa and began pushing them back. As Marcus Antonius's men overran the camp of Cassius, Brutus's men invaded the camp of Caesar. When Brutus's troops reached the command tent belonging to Caesar, they found his bed empty. Caesar, the son of the divine, had gone to hide within the marshes as almost 16,000 of his men were cut down by the forces of Marcus Junius Brutus. The side-by-side invasion of one another's camps kicked up so much dust and dirt that visibility was hampered during the battle. As Marcus Antonius pulled his men back from the camp of Cassius, ordering their return to his fortifications, they passed many of the victorious liberator forces who were rushing to the aid of Cassius. Appian tells us that, unable to see, each army thought the other to be an allied army as they passed one another through the debris. Having withdrawn to higher ground, Cassius struggled to study the scene, but through the dust he could not make out who was who. Spying a force of cavalry charging hard for his camp, Gaius Cassius Longinus, choosing not to be taken captive by Marcus Antonius, ordered a freedman by the name of Pindarus to execute him. After the obedient Pindarus ran Cassius through, the cavalry belonging to Marcus Junius Brutus arrived to announce their victory over Caesar and to assist the overrun camp of Cassius. Over the slain body of his brother-in-law, Brutus wept, lamenting that with the passing of Gaius Cassius Longinus died the last of the Romans. After ordering a secret burial, Brutus kept all knowledge of the death of Cassius from his legions for several days, fearing that those men who had been pressed into service through Cassius's cruel razing of Asia's cities might simply abandon him, or worse, defect to Antonius. On the same day the triumvirs and the liberators fought the first battle of Philippi, which ended in a draw. A fleet carrying 2 reserve legions for Marcus Antonius, along with supplies for his army, was sunk by the naval forces of Gnaeus Domitius Aenobarbus. As Marcus Junius Brutus struggled to piece together a plan which would ensure the legions that had belonged to Cassius would remain loyal to him, Marcus Antonius, who did not yet know that Cassius was dead, sent 1 legion to the province of Achaia to collect supplies. To keep the morale of his men up, Marcus Antonius promised his victorious legions an additional 5,000 denarii per soldier and 25,000 denarii per centurion. In celebration of their victory over the legions of Gaius Cassius Longinus and the slaying of approximately 8,000 of his forces, the armies of Marcus Antonius, despite suffering the loss of 16,000 men under the command of Caesar, hailed Marcus Antonius as imperator on the battlefield. However, with delayed supplies incoming and the resources around Philippi stripped clean, Antonius the imperator desperately needed to force the liberators into a decisive battle before his own legions lost hope, began to starve, or began to consider changing sides.